Hello everyone, welcome to Brain Blitz Audios. Today, in this episode of Mind Maps, we're going to be dealing with a chapter of biology. Now this chapter is titled Life Processes, and it's the 6th chapter in the science textbook for grade 10 in the CBSE syllabus. So, this chapter is very important because this is an overview of the processes of life that are very important in an organism, particularly a human being, and without these processes there would be no life. So in order to study a chapter as vast as this, we need to use tools. Mind maps are really helpful as tools when it comes to preparing for last-minute revisions. The only downside is that they are quite extensive, as you can see, and so therefore this video is devoted to explaining them in some detail. So we have 6 parts to this mind map, and we're going to be discussing each of them one by one. So, life processes. So humans are living organisms, and in order to ensure that living organisms live, they need to do certain processes, which are what we call life processes. So, for example, in order for living organisms to function, they need energy, and the way they get that energy is by nutrition. In order to distribute that energy to every single part of the body, you need circulation. In order to use up that energy, you need oxygen, which requires respiration. And finally, once you used up energy, the food that we eat usually contains waste particles, which must be excreted. And also you have nervous control, chemical control, and so on. So in this particular chapter, in this particular mind map, we're going to be looking at some of the very important life processes like nutrition, respiration, circulation, as well as excretion. So, since life processes depend on energy, we'll start off with nutrition. Nutrition is the source by which living organisms get their energy. Now, when it comes to nutrition, we broadly divide living organisms into 2 parts. There are autotrophs and there are heterotrophs. Now within heterotrophs you have various subtypes like saprotrophs, parasites, insectivores, etc., etc. But enough of that. When we look at autotrophs, the definition for autotroph is an organism which creates its own food. So autotrophs are those which are able to synthesize their own food. An example for this is the plant kingdom. So in the plant kingdom, most of the plants, they depend entirely on a process known as photosynthesis to obtain their food. So they create food from sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, and minerals. So by undergoing this complex process called photosynthesis, which you will study as a separate chapter in grade 12, you will be able to understand how plants convert those raw materials into food. So that's it about autotrophs. Now let's look at heterotrophs. Now heterotrophs are those which depend on other organisms for their food. So you would have organisms which depend on plants. You have organisms which depend on plant-eating organisms. You have organisms which depend on the decaying matter. You have organisms which suck off nutrition from another organism without their approval, like parasites. So you have a lot of varieties when it comes to the heterotrophs. So we're going to be looking at some of the basic processes that are found in higher-end heterotrophs. So the animal kingdom contains higher-end heterotrophs, and in the animal kingdom you usually find these 5 steps which are related to nutrition. So nutrition contains 5 basic steps. The first one is ingestion, which is where the food is taken into the body. So for example, chewing and swallowing in humans. So we ingest food by chewing and swallowing through our mouth. And after that, we have a process called digestion. So digestion is where the food is broken down into smaller parts. So in the humans, we have digestion taking place in the stomach, which converts proteins into peptides and amino acids. In the small intestine, in the mouth, you can see starch getting converted into sugars, and you have fats being converted into glycerol and fatty acids. So digestion is where the food that we eat, which is usually complex, gets broken down into its constituent elements, and which is prepped for absorption. Now, absorption is where the nutrients are absorbed by the body to create energy. So we need carbohydrates to be converted to sugars so that they can create energy. We also need proteins and their constituents in order to create body parts, and we need fats for all weather conditions. So we need fats to protect us against the cold. So this is where absorption comes in. In the human body, we find the small intestine doing this particular process, and also the large intestine, which absorbs water. Now next we have assimilation. Assimilation is a process which is not directly involving the digestive system. Assimilation is where the nutrients that are absorbed and the energy that we get is taken to different parts of the body. So this is actually a function of the circulatory system. So the nutrients that we have absorbed from the small intestine are then circulated throughout the blood, throughout the body by the blood, and then they are converted to energy or building blocks depending on the type. And finally, we have digestion. So we know that the food that we eat gets absorbed to create energy and create building blocks, but all of our food is not absorbed in this way. There are always some waste materials. So the waste is ejected from the body in this case. So the process of digestion is where the waste that is generated from the food we eat is ejected. So in animals, we have digestion taking place through the anus, and that's how we find cases of digestion. So let's, in order to focus ourselves on the nutrition in human beings, let's look at the alimentary canal and their secretions. So we have the mouth. This is where digestion starts. So this is where we ingest our food and we start digesting starch and sugars. This is done with the help of a secretion known as saliva, which is basically amylase diluted in water. Then we have the pharynx. This is basically the common food / wind pipe. So both air and food pass through the pharynx. Then we have the esophagus, which is the food pipe. So this brings the food from the mouth and the pharynx to the next organ, which is the stomach. The stomach is where the food is stored for some time, and we also have digestion taking place due to gastric juices, and we have hydrochloric acid, which kills off the germs and other harmful organisms which may be ingested with the food. Now, from the stomach, food is taken to the small intestine. The small intestine also creates juices which digest starch, proteins, and lipids, and it also takes secretions from the liver and the gallbladder. So the liver and gallbladder secrete bile, which is very important for the digestion of fats. We also get secretions from the pancreas, which convert proteins mostly. And in the small intestine, everything is completely digested. Then the process of absorption takes place. So it absorbs, the small intestine's primary function is to absorb the nutrients from the food. So all the building blocks are absorbed from the small intestine, and then the remaining waste is taken to the large intestine, whose function is to absorb water. So in the small intestine, all the nutrients get absorbed, but in the large intestine, the waste that we get is very fluid. It is converted to a solid by the absorption of water. So water is absorbed from the waste material by the large intestine. Now, the remaining solid waste is removed from the body through the anus. So this is where egestion takes place. So that gives us an overall idea of the types of nutrition and the stages of nutrition in animals, and also a brief intro on the alimentary canal. Now, we know that the food is now inside our blood, and it reaches the different tissues. So it's taken from the small intestine and it reaches the tissues. But we all know that humans are aerobic organisms. So that means we require oxygen to survive. And the main function of oxygen is to oxidize the food in order to create energy. So therefore, in order to get oxygen, we need to undergo the process of respiration, which is what we'll be taking next. So when it comes to respiration, there are various structures that are present in the animal kingdom as well as the plant kingdom. So we're going to be restricting ourselves to that of human beings. So in human beings, the air is first passed through the nostrils. So it first reaches the nostrils, and then it moves on to the nasal cavity. So in the nasal cavity and the nostrils, we have hairs that filter out dust. We have the air humidified in that cavity and also brought up to the body's temperature. So after that, it goes to the pharynx, which is the common food and windpipe. Now, instead of going into the esophagus, it goes into the larynx, or the voice box. Now, this larynx has an epiglottis on top of it, which shuts down over the larynx when food is passed through the pharynx. So that's how we avoid choking on our food. However, if we try to talk while we're eating, then the epiglottis opens up and then we suffer from choking. Now, from the larynx, the air that we've breathed goes through the trachea. The trachea is also known as the windpipe, and it is made out of cartilaginous rings, and it takes the air that we breathe from the larynx down to the lungs. So the trachea divide to form a pair of bronchi, and then each bronchi lead towards the lungs. So the left bronchi enters the left lung, and the right bronchi enters the right lung. So the lungs contain two structures. The first are the bronchioles. So each bronchi, after entering into the lung, divides into smaller and smaller pipes, which are called bronchioles. And after the end of all the separations, the terminal bronchioles reach air sacs known as alveoli. Now, alveoli are the most important part of the lungs. They enable exchange of gases. So the whole purpose of respiration is to exchange the gases present in the blood. So after energy is being used, we get a lot of carbon dioxide. You have to remove that, and we also have to put in new oxygen molecules into the blood. So therefore, that's where the alveoli comes in. So the capillaries in the alveoli, they diffuse out carbon dioxide, and oxygen is diffused into those capillaries and into the blood. So that's how the gas exchange takes place. Now, after you have carbon dioxide in the alveoli, it goes back through the bronchioles and then to the lungs, then to the bronchi, trachea, larynx, pharynx, nasal cavity, nostrils, and back out again. So that's how the breathing apparatus of the body works. Now, from the alveoli, the blood that we get is oxygenated, so it contains a lot of oxygen, and that blood is now taken into the tissues of the body, where the oxygen that is present in the blood is transferred into the tissues for creation of energy. So oxygen, along with the glucose and other energy components that we have, is turned into a usable form of energy, which can be used by the body to perform activities and also to create new building blocks. So you require energy for those. So that concludes respiration. Now, if you recall, both nutrition and respiration put in objects or molecules into the blood. So in nutrition, food or the nutrients go into the blood in the small intestine. In respiration, the alveoli enables gas exchange in the blood. So as you can see, in order for assimilation to take place in nutrition, as well as for the availability of oxygen in the human body, you require the presence of blood. So blood is basically the part of the circulatory system, and so therefore that's the system which we'll be tackling next. Now, the circulatory system by itself is very extensive, so we're going to divide that into two parts. The first part deals with the transportation in plants. Now, when we look at plants, they do not have an actual system which deals with circulation. What they do have are differentiated tissues. So the differentiated tissues here include the root tissue and also the vascular tissue. The vascular tissue is what we call the xylem and the phloem. So when we look at the transportation of air, air is directly taken into the leaves by the stomata. So it absorbs CO2 and removes oxygen. And that's for air. But for other components of photosynthesis like water and minerals, you require the roots. So the roots take in water and the associated minerals from it, from the ground. So the roots absorb those, and then they take it to the vascular system, which contains the xylem and the phloem. So now we have two forms, two vascular tissues containing different functions. So xylem is primarily responsible for water transportation to the leaves. So this is the primary objective of xylem. So xylem transports water and the minerals along with it to the leaves, which are present at the top of the tree. And in order for this to happen, xylem enlists the help of transpiration. So 90% of the water that we take in is transpired outside, so that creates a pull which enables the xylem to transport more minerals and water. Now, the phloem, its function is food transportation. So we know that plants are autotrophs, so therefore they create their own food. The food is then transported by the phloem from the leaves to the storage areas. So each plant has its own storage areas. Some store them in the roots, others store them in underground stems, and so on. So wherever the storage place is, it's very important that food gets there. Some of it is used by the plant, yes, but most of the food is stored. So therefore, the phloem is a very important part of the plant. It's a very important vascular tissue that takes food towards its storage areas. And both the phloem and the xylem work together when it comes to food transport and water transport. The phloem requires water, and that is taken up from the xylem, and then the after the food is transported, the water is transferred back into the xylem, which is used for transportation of minerals to the leaves. So that's how circulation in plants work. Now what about the humans? Now what about in animals? If we look at human beings, circulation involves three particular parts: the blood, which is a fluid vascular tissue found in the human body; the heart, which is an organ that pumps blood; and then blood vessels, which are the pathways through which blood reaches the human tissues. So note that in human beings, the circulation is closed, so that means it passes through specific vessels and not through the open gaps of the body. Now, blood vessels are again divided into arteries, veins, and capillaries. So the primary function of arteries is to transport blood from the heart. The function of veins is to transport blood to the heart. And the function of capillaries is to enable diffusion. So capillaries are very small, so they are present in between the tissues, and then they enable diffusion of water as well as food from the blood to the tissues, and also waste from the tissues to the blood. So that's how the circulatory system works. Now, when it comes to human circulation, we have two particular types of circulation: the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation. So let's start off with how pulmonary circulation works. So the term pulmonary refers to the lungs. So if we look at pulmonary circulation, it basically means circulation of blood to the lungs and back again. So in the human body, we have two particular types of circulation, and that's why the human circulatory system is it undergoes double circulation. So blood is taken to all of the body, but once it's reached the heart, it has to go to the lungs for a recharge of oxygen, and that recharge circulation is what we call pulmonary circulation. So in the heart, once it gets the blood from the vena cava, it goes through the right atrium of the heart. So the right atrium is this part. It's a simple diagram. And then it reaches the left atrium, and from the left atrium, from the right ventricle, sorry, let's rewind. So from the vena cava, the heart receives blood into the right atrium, and then the right atrium moves the blood down to the right ventricle. Ventricles are the bottom chambers, and heart and atria are the top chambers. So from the right ventricle, the heart now pumps the same blood through the pulmonary artery into the lungs. Now in the lungs, as we've seen in respiration, the exchange of gases takes place. So carbon dioxide is taken out, oxygen is taken in, and then this oxygenated blood goes through the pulmonary vein back into the heart. Now when it goes back into the heart, it reaches the left atrium, and this is where systematic circulation starts. So systematic circulation is where the blood is taken to the rest of the body, such as, excretion or digestion or assimilation of food. All of that is undertaken in systematic circulation. Pulmonary circulation is just for exchange of gases. Now, once it reaches the left atrium of the heart, that's right here, it moves down to the left ventricle, which is another chamber beneath the left atrium. And from the left ventricle, it moves through the aorta, which is basically an artery. It's also known as the largest blood vessel in the human body. So from the aorta, it goes into other arteries and eventually reaches all of the body parts, except for the lungs, of course. So all of the body parts get, even the heart, they get their dose of blood. So they get their dose of, energy as well as oxygen, and from there the blood collects waste and also carbon dioxide, and then the blood then reaches back to the vena cava. Vena cava are veins that are present right before the heart. So from the vena cava it enters the heart, and then the whole system of double circulation starts again. So that's how the circulatory system works in human beings. Now, when we circulate blood, we distribute food and oxygen to the cells. Now, the removal of carbon dioxide is tackled by respiration, and the removal of food waste is tackled by the digestive system. However, there are also other wastes that are present in the body. Now, after getting energy out of the nutrients are converted into waste products, especially products that contain nitrogen and ammonia. So these are very deadly for the body, and therefore they have to be removed from the body, and that's where the excretory system plays a role. So the excretory system is the system where waste, the body waste, is removed from the body. So if we look at plants, plants usually have transpiration. This is where excess water is removed. We also have other processes like guttation, where water along with minerals is removed. So excretory system, plants do not have an excretory system per se. It's more of an excretory process. But if we look at animals, especially higher order animals like humans, we have an extensive excretory system comprising of a very important organ known as the kidneys. So in animals and birds, in the animal kingdom, the waste is excreted as urine or even as urea or ammonia by itself. So in humans, it's based on urine, so therefore it's basically the liquid form. So the primary process of excretion is done by the kidneys. So the kidneys receive blood, and they filter out the wastes from the blood, and then from the kidney the waste now goes through the ureters into the urinary bladder, which stores the waste for some time, and then when the bladder gets full, it passes through the urethra, which is a duct which removes the waste from the human body. Now, let's have a closer look at how the kidney removes the wastes. Now, in kidneys, we have a unit called as a nephron. This is the basic unit of the kidney, and each nephron in the kidneys would help in removing wastes. So the blood that's here that enters the kidney moves on into the 1 million or so nephrons that we have in our kidneys, and then in each of these nephrons it undergoes a specific process. So nephron contains a Bowman's capsule, so that's where the blood is filtered. So the formed elements like RBCs and platelets are removed and sent back to the vein. And then through the glomerulus, which is the next step, which is the next organ, we have removal of water. So we have all of the wastes are removed from the blood. So all of the molecules like proteins, fats, carbs, and wastes, etc. All of these are removed from the blood. Now, from the glomerulus, the filtrate that we get, which are proteins, carbs, and wastes, etc., they move to the proximal convoluted tubule, the PCT. Now, in this PCT, it reabsorbs essential nutrients like proteins, fats, and carbs back into the human blood. Now, the remaining stuff that we get is water as well as the nitrogenous wastes. So from the PCT, it moves on into the loop of Henry, which is what we call it, an actual U-shaped loop in the nephrons. So this loop helps in reabsorption of water. So water is reabsorbed, and the remaining content that we get is wastes, nitrogenous wastes. Now from here it moves on to the distal convoluted tubule. Now in the DCT, what happens is that we have osmotic balance. So osmotic balancing takes place. So what does this mean? Now, when you drink too much water, you have a lot of water in your system, and the excess water has to be removed. So the DCT adds more water into the wastes so that they are diluted more. Now, in a case where you have less water in your system, you need to conserve as much water as possible. So the distal convoluted tubule makes sure that the urine, the wastes are concentrated, and then they're sent on their way to the ureters and then outside of the body. So that's how the excretory system ensures that the water balance of the body is kept, and also it ensures in the removal of nitrogenous wastes. So in the mind map, we have dealt with nutrition, respiration. Let's put in the pointer. We've dealt with nutrition, respiration, circulation, and also excretion. However, mind maps are not the only tools that we can use for last-minute revisions. Enter flowcharts. So this chapter has a lot of flowcharts. This one deals with the pathway of air entering through the respiratory system. So it shows us the relation, whether the passage of air is one-way or two-way. So nostril to nasal passage is a two-way system. The nasal passage to the pharynx is a two-way system. And the pharynx to the larynx is a one-way system. And from the larynx to the trachea, it's a two-way system. From the trachea to the lungs is a two-way system. From the lungs to the bronchi is a one-way system. And from the bronchi to bronchioles is a two-way system. And finally, from the bronchioles to the alveoli is a two-way system. So two-way means that air goes in and air comes out. But the one-way system means that air goes in only. It goes one way. So it's a one-lane road on this part, and then it's a two-lane road in here. You can remember it like that. So this is how air is passing through the respiratory system. Now let's look at the body parts in the alimentary canal. So again, mouth or saliva, it secretes salivary amylase, which is also known as ptyalin. The food along with the salivary amylase enters the pharynx, and this is the common window, the common pipe, and from here it goes to the esophagus, which is the food pipe. From the esophagus, the mixture reaches the stomach. So the stomach stores the food and also secretes its own contents like hydrochloric acid, gastric juice, mucus, as well as a digestive enzyme known as pepsin, which acts on proteins. Now from here, the food passes through the small intestine, which also receives input from the pancreas and the liver. So I believe the liver has been left out here. So we also have the liver, which gives us bile juice. Bile juice is helpful in emulsifying fats, while the pancreas gives us pancreatic juice, which contains pancreatic amylase that acts on proteins as well as lipids. And then the small intestine, it has its own secretion, which is called succus entericus. And this also converts all of the proteins and fats and carbohydrates to their most essential form. So that's the intestinal juice we're talking about, succus entericus, and small intestine helps in absorption. So the food is absorbed in the small intestine into the circulatory system, and then it moves on to the large intestine, where absorption of water takes place. So the waste that we get finally from the food is solidified in the large intestine, and then that solid waste is removed through the anus. Now, if we look at the process of nutrition itself, ingestion is taking in of food. Digestion is where complex food molecules are converted into simpler molecules. Absorption is where the simple food is absorbed through diffusion. Assimilation is the absorption of food by cells through the blood or other medium for its growth and repair. Egestion is where the undigested material is thrown out. So both from the digestive system and also from the excretory system, if you can think of it as egestion. However, egestion is mostly involving the digestive system. Now, if we look at how glucose is oxidized, the glucose in the cytoplasm of a cell. So this is what happens in the cell. So once we get glucose, we convert the glucose into pyruvate. So glucose contains 6 carbon atoms in that molecule. It gets converted into 2 molecules of pyruvate, and each molecule of pyruvate contains 3 carbons. Now, when we don't have oxygen in our body, like what happens if we run, pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid and energy. Lactic acid is again a molecule containing 3 carbon atoms. Now, if we have a lot of lactic acid in our muscles, that leads to cramps and pain. So massage is recommended for that. Now, when we have the presence of oxygen in our blood, in our cells, which for example is in mitochondria, the pyruvate undergoes a complex process which then yields out carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So it's energy that we actually require. Carbon dioxide is a waste product. Water is essential as well because it mediates a lot of processes. Now, what about organisms where there are no oxygen at all? So, for example, in yeast, there is no oxygen in the cells at all. So in this particular case, the pyruvate is then converted to ethanol, which is basically alcohol, carbon dioxide, and energy. Ethanol contains 2 carbon atoms in 1 molecule. So that's how the glucose, which is absorbed from the food, is oxidized in various organisms and in various situations to provide energy. So if you do not have oxygen at all, you get ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy. If, for example, you're undergoing physical activity and oxygen is very less, you convert pyruvate to lactic acid and energy. However, if you have adequate presence of oxygen, then using the complex processes, pyruvate gets converted to carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Now we're looking at excretion in human beings. So the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus filters the blood, so it puts the formed elements back into the blood, and also all the filtrates like proteins, other nutrients, and wastes are taken out. Then we have the tubular part of the nephron. The tubular part contains the PCT, the loop of Henle, and the DCT. So the PCT removes out essential nutrients from the filtrate. So that's where all the important stuff is taken back into the blood. The loop of Henle removes a major amount of water and some salts. The distal convoluted tubule also adjusts the amount of salts and water in, well, the filtrate depending on the osmotic balance of the body. Then we have the collecting duct. It takes all the filtrates from the nephrons. From each nephron you have a collecting duct, and then it joins into the ureter. And then the ureter is the main tube that comes out of the kidneys and takes the urine to the urinary bladder. And the urinary bladder stores it until there is extended pressure, which leads to the urethra to pass urine. And then the urethra is the actual pathway through which urine is excreted from the body. So that concludes the flowcharts as well. We hope you found this episode interesting. Life processes is an extensive chapter. Most of the systems that we study here will be taken in your grade 11 in extensive detail. So don't forget to check out those mind maps and also those questions. And we also have a lot of mind maps based on physics and chemistry for grade 10 as well as grade 11 and 12. So therefore, don't forget to catch up with those by subscribing to our channel, Brain Blitz Audios. So until the next episode, take care, stay safe, bye-bye for now.